Welcome to Hallowed Ground Storycast. I'm Alan.
And I'm Anya, and this episode is about my high school movie obsession, Bend It Like Beckham.
Anyone can cook aloo gobi, but who can bend a ball like Beckham?
So if you haven't seen Bend It Like Beckham, it is a 2002 British movie about an Indian British girl named Jess Minder. And Jess has always been good at football, but she's only played casually in the park with her friends. One day, she's spotted playing by another girl, Juliet, who plays for a women's football club and recruits her to join. Jess has to hide her football habit from her traditional Sikh parents, who think she should be focused on learning how to cook a proper Indian dinner to find a good husband and helping prepare for her sister's upcoming wedding. Eventually, Jess realizes that she'll never be happy if she doesn't pursue a career in football and convinces her family to support her. Jess and Juliet impress a soccer scout from America and both get a full scholarship to play in university. Bend It Like Beckham was written and directed by Gurinder Chadha and also co-written by Palmeira Burgess and Guljit Bindra. It stars Parminder Nagra, Keira Knightley, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Anupam Kher, Shaznay Lewis, and Archie Punjabi. It had a $6 million budget and made back $76 million in theaters globally. In 2015, it was turned into a musical in London that is now touring internationally.
I want to let everyone know that you did all those names in one take, and it's really impressive. It was amazing, actually.
Well, I don't know. They're not that hard.
So, when was the first time you said you saw this? I mean, earlier you said it was your high school movie obsession. So was that the first time you saw it?
Yeah, so this movie came out early high school for me. And I think I saw it in theaters and then immediately bought the DVD. It was probably my most watched movie of high school. I think it was one of the first movies where I watched the director's commentary. And there's an extra on the DVD where the director, Gurinder Chadha, makes aloo gobi with her mom and her auntie watching. And
that's awesome.
So me and my friend Lauren watched that DVD extra, and then aloo gobi basically became our go-to dish that we would always make together whenever we were staying over at her house.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Oh, and so this is even a deeper throwback, but one of the reasons why she and I were so into this movie. So her dad is a programmer, and when we were in elementary school, probably second grade or something, he was teaching us how to make websites on GeoCities or whatever. Actually, no, I think he had his own server that he hosted it on, but we made a fan page about Mia Hamm together.
Oh, wow.
It was just pictures of Mia Hamm that we had gotten off of, I don't even know what search engines existed back then. Definitely pre-Google. A 9-year-old talking about all of the reasons why I love Mia Hamm.
That's so cool.
I mean, I definitely played soccer as a kid, but I was never good at soccer. Just the idea of a professional female athlete was super inspiring to me as a kid, even if I wasn't that into soccer specifically. And then the other level that I really connected to this movie on was another one of my really good friends in high school was Taiwanese American. And so I would, go over to her house all the time and hang out with her parents. And obviously Taiwanese American is very different in the specifics compared to Indian British. There's definitely something a little more universal about being a third culture kid, I think is what it's often called, where it's children of immigrants, where you're kind of in this in-between space between your parents' culture and the dominant culture of the place where you live. Your parents sometimes have different values and are a little bit stricter than all of your white friends' parents. Watching my friend go through that and try and grapple with those things secondhand, seeing that portrayed so authentically in a movie. It just like, it really resonated with me. So what did you think about it? Was this the first time you'd seen it?
No, I've definitely seen the movie before. I think I saw it around the time it came out, probably when it was like hitting DVD. But I haven't watched it in a really long time. Definitely not since I had kids. And it was kind of weird where I was like really identifying with the parents at different points, not in like sympathizing with their position or anything, but going like, oh yeah, that's a real thing. You're like, no, you're going to get your heart broken. No, just conform to the culture and don't have a painful life. Like that's all very real. And struggling with that to like, let your kids be who they are is like, I was like, oh my God, like I'm so old. How did this happen?
Yeah, that's funny. I guess, not having kids myself, I'm still definitely as much in the like young teenager perspective as I was when I first watched it. So that's interesting that you are kind of now seeing it from the other side.
Also, like the other weird thing about watching this movie after years of watching other movies, around the time that this came out, there was another movie that we might do for the show that I really, really love. It's an adaptation of Shakespeare's first play called Titus Andronicus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like one of those modern setting versions of a Shakespeare movie. One of the bad guys in it is the coach of the soccer team or football team. And he's like a really terrible person in that movie. And then he's in another movie where he's the main character called Match Point. It's like a Woody Allen movie where he is a really awful human being, like a total sociopath.
Just like Woody Allen.
Like, I'll just briefly spoil this movie because I'm sure that people won't ever watch it. It's well written and well directed and really well acted, but like is kind of vile. That same guy is like a tennis pro and he wants to become rich, so he like seduces this daughter of a like a magnate, like a business guy,
mm-hmm.
and becomes her husband, and then gets a job in that guy's company because of nepotism, and then has like an affair with Scarlett Johansson, who's like poor and who he actually wants to be with, but she's too poor for him.
Gross.
Yeah. And then she ends up getting pregnant. He doesn't want to leave his wife to take care of that situation. And so he ends up killing his girlfriend, and then everything turns out okay in the end for him.
Are you, what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's the movie. That's what it's about.
Ugh, okay. Thank you for just telling me what happens so I don't have to watch it, because no.
He's terrible in that movie. So watching this movie, I was like, you dirtbag. Like you're a terrible person. And it was like, I had to constantly remind myself, actually, no, he's an okay guy.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, especially because I feel like his character is one that like could be interpreted as like somewhat insidious and predatory if you wanted to read it that way.
Yeah, there's definitely problematic stuff, but it's not like those other characters.
Yeah.
That I have that association with.
So one of the things that I love about this movie is that it's so thematically rich, but it also is kind of like an easy to digest movie that is both like subverting some things, but like mostly follows the form of the like teen romantic comedy that we're used to, and is like pretty easy to digest, even though it's so thematically rich and like covers all of these different topics. And so the first thing I wanted to hit on was just the experience of what it's like to be children of immigrants in a dominant culture that's like not the same as your family's culture, and trying to balance those like family expectations with the broader cultural expectations and like your own personal expectations. When the 15-year anniversary of the release came up, there was an Atlantic article by Rajpreet here, who, grew up as a kid of Indian immigrants in Indiana, who also had family living in the UK, and talking about how this movie really helped her kind of grapple with her own identity. And made her really feel seen and represented in media for like the first time, and honestly, like, there hasn't been any movie that's spoken to her quite like it, even in the past 15 years. It really helped her feel more at peace with herself and her identity when she was either feeling alienated from her Indian culture or feeling alienated from her mostly white school community. I think the movie is really important on that level, and that it speaks to that kind of specific group of people. And I think one of the reasons why it works so well is because it is so autobiographical. She was never that into sports or soccer at all. She actually kind of thought football was really stupid before she started working on this movie, although she became a fan of football through making the movie. But she did, as a young kid and then a younger woman growing up, refused to learn how to make chapatis from her mother because she thought it was sexist that, like, women had to be in the kitchen all the time, like, making this food, and the men never did any of that. A lot of the lines from Jasminda's mom and dad really came from her experiences with her own parents and family members, and especially, she said, like, all of the lines from Jules's mom about, like,
Jasminda, isn't it? Jasminda. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Do you know, I cooked a lovely curry the other day.
Ugh, God.
you know, it was like, it just, like, flowed so easily from her fingers. She was like, I didn't even realize I was, like, carrying all this, like, repressed shit from having to deal with my friend's parents when I was a kid, and all of those, like, you know.
Most coming of age stories are like, your parents want one thing, you want another, and then conflict, right? Mm-hmm. And then with this story, you've got this third element where, like you said, there's this bigger culture, this white culture that she also has to cope with, that wants something from her. There's the things that she wants for herself, and then there's the traditional culture that she's having to deal with, all the expectations from that. Not just her parents, but that whole community is, like, literally has surveillance on her, like, all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, it adds such a great element to this story. It, like, makes that coming of age story pop a little bit more, and it makes it so interesting too, I think, for people who are outside of the Sikh culture to get, like, a authentic window into it. I wish there was more of that. Like, it's just fantastic way to tell that coming of age story.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So as I was, like, looking for articles about the movie, just to kind of see what other people had said about it, I came across this one blog post that I'm actually not going to link to because I don't agree with most of what it said. But it talks about the representation of the other, like capital O, in this movie, and how this person really thought that the movie was, like, setting the Indian people apart and kind of, like, exoticizing them. And as I was reading that article, I was just like, what the fuck movie were you watching? Like, if anything, I feel like the, like, mainstream British white culture is treated as the other in this movie.
Yeah. It really, like, humanizes her parents in so many ways, and, like, shows that they have all the same struggles. Just the context is a little bit different.
Yeah, I think, and so one of the things about this movie that's interesting is it does, like, it touches on a lot of things like homophobia and racism and, like, intergenerational conflict and, like, sexual freedom and all of that, but it does it in a very lighthearted way. It's not super heavy-handed. I think its message and tone really works a lot better in 2002 than it does in 2018.
Why do you say that?
The movie has a little bit of a sort of, like, everyone's a little bit racist and homophobic, but, like, we're all good people on the inside, and, like, sometimes the people you love say problematic things, but, like, it's okay for you to love them anyway. Like, it still works on an emotional level for me, but based on just, like, how openly horrible things have gotten with regards to, like, racism and you know, anti-gay, anti-woman bullshit in 2019, you know, like, a lot of the microaggressions are paid for laughs here.
Yeah.
And it's not really grappled with in the way that, like, that shit can be really traumatic.
I definitely laughed at those parts that where you're supposed to be laughing. But I was like, this doesn't fly anymore.
Yeah. Like if this movie was set in 2018, like instead of just like making a joke about wearing trackies, Jules would have had to sit down with her mom and be like, look, Mom, I'm not a lesbian, but like you need to cut that shit out because it's not okay.
Right. Yeah. Like for this to come out in 2002, I think it was like in one of these weird production limbos where you had 9/11 happen in America, and then things that had already been made, like had been filmed and produced and were getting ready to be released, like don't reflect that post 9/11 reality. And so for people who were Sikh, like her family, where the father wears a turban all the time, and like his reality shifted after that. A lot of like the bad situation that is going on in the UK these days is like polarization and escalation of those issues that started, from the Iraq War and the way that they allied with the US to invade and all of that stuff. So this movie doesn't reflect any of that, but or at least when I watched it, I was like, wow, this is like, it's weirdly not exactly naive, but like it just doesn't have any of that in there, which would have been like very much, I feel like, a background radiation just like 2 or 3 years after this was released if it had been written then.
Yeah, and even just the fact that like they show the parents going to the gate to say goodbye to their daughters, right? Like I remember when you used to be able to do that, and in 2002 you could not do that anymore, but I guess it was still like a new enough thing when they were filming it in 2001 probably.
I was watching it with Christina and she said exactly that. She's like, why do they all have their shoes on? How did they get there without all taking their shoes off?
Yeah.
But it's still like, it's such a charming, wonderful story. It's so good.
And before we move on to the next topic, I wanted to just like point out a couple ways the movie is visually representing the way that Jess has this kind of like dual identity. And there's the scene where she's playing with the cabbage in the kitchen like it's a soccer ball on her knees.
Yeah.
And when she's like using the like brightly colored clothes on the clothesline as a way to practice bending the ball like around a goalie. And when they have all of her teammates helping her put her sari back on so she can run back and make it to the second half of the wedding reception, and like, and that's one of those moments that I feel like does kind of speak to this, like, the good, happy side of cultural ignorance. That's, like, not the best way to put it. But, it's like these white British girls, like, they don't know necessarily how, like, formal Indian clothing works. And it's kind of funny that they don't know how it works, but they're trying really hard and they're like, expressing solidarity for her and her priorities and like helping her get back to what she needs to do. This movie is expressing a certain kind of like multiculturalism and melting pot, a melting pot vision of society in a way that was really made a bit more problematic by 9/11 and by some of the like outwardly aggressive and obvious expressions of white nationalism that have become really prominent in 2019 that weren't there, at least weren't as like obviously out there in 2002.
Definitely. Yeah. But I totally agree with the movie visually representing her kind of dual cultural experience. And I was actually thinking that when I was watching the movie, the Mexican director Guillermo del Toro has this thing that he calls visual world building. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what I was thinking about watching this movie. Like the way that he talks about it, it's basically like you put elements inside of the frame and you never have to explain them because they explain themselves and explain the world to the people who are watching. She's playing soccer with the cabbage and all that stuff. It's just so smart. It's really well done. It's not just the dialogue and the writing, but it's like what is actually being depicted visually for us. It tells us everything. It's great.
So the next thing I wanted to talk about was women in sports and femininity and feminism. There's a lot in the movie about the way that women are both sort of like discouraged from playing sports at all, and also have like a lack of opportunities to do sports professionally compared to men. It's kind of depressing that they talk about America as kind of like this place where it's like,
how long have you been playing?
For ages, but just in the park. Nothing as serious as this.
This serious? That'll do for now. I want to play professionally.
Wow, can you do that? I mean, as a job like?
Sure. Not really here, but you can in America. They've got a pro league with new stadiums and everything.
Really?
The WUSA league that they were talking about, it actually only lasted for 2 years. So it ran from, or 2 or 3 years, it ran from around 2000 to 2003. That was kind of depressing about watching this movie. There's like, I think, a lot of optimism about like the future of women in sport that didn't come to fruition.
I didn't realize it was so short.
Yeah. In some ways, I think that is part of what makes the film like still feel so relevant, right? Is that it's 15 years later and like the situation of women's sports hasn't actually improved that much. People still make fun of the WNBA all the time. The WNBA is still like the only real professional women's sports league that exists out there.
Yeah.
To some extent, women's sports have become better supported at the university level. So I think it was like Title IX, basically, that mandates that schools spend the same amount of money on women's sports as they do men's sports. And so it takes a lot of women's sports to make up for like, you know, the football, basketball, baseball teams for men's sides. Or maybe it's not exactly the same, but it's like some proportion. And so like... I played women's rugby in college. Like a few number of schools actually had like NCAA competitive teams. And I think it was just an accounting thing where it was like, oh, we need to be able to count as many women's sports as possible towards our Title IX numbers. So like those teams were like very well funded because they wanted to be counted as like dollars put towards women's sports.
Yep. LSU had a team when I was there, and I was friends with a lot of those girls.
Oh,
those
really?
Were cool girls. Yeah. I never met a female rugby player I didn't like. They were all cool.
Oh, that's good to know. Like the sports movie is such a well-known and like well-trodden genre. I'm trying to think of like what other really good female sports movies are. Like obviously A League of Their Own is really iconic, but it's also very historical. It doesn't quite resonate like this movie does with like the everyday experience of just like a young girl who loves playing sports. And then as far as sports movies go, I really liked the way that they kind of wove all of the games into the plot. You know, there's lots of different montages and lots of different games that are included in the movie, but it never feels repetitive. I feel like the sports drama supports the narrative really well, and you're never just like bored that they're playing soccer. And also like the soccer footage was pretty well done. But yeah, most of the other soccer players in the movie are legit just soccer players. So that obviously like Parminder and Kiara are actresses, and then the Captain Mel is actually a British pop star.
Oh.
Shaznay Lewis. So she I think one of her songs is also included in the movie. But yeah, she was like more famous than Keira Knightley at the time. And she was like kind of a big get for them. Yeah, Keira Knightley was 16 in this movie. This was like her first movie, and that really put her on the map. And I think it says a lot about what opportunities are available to what kind of people, that after this movie, Kiera's career obviously like took off like crazy, and she was in Pirates of the Caribbean and all of that. And then Parminder basically ended up on ER, which is like not a bad show, but it's just like there's a reason why one of them ended up as a movie star and the other one ended up as like a working TV actress, and it's not that Kiera's more talented.
I think Kira's first thing is Star Wars.
Oh yeah, she was a body double for Padme.
She is the queen. She's the one on the throne, and Padme is pretending to not be the queen, but one of the handmaidens. I think you're totally right, though, in the point that you're making about racism, like, clearly. Because she does such a great job carrying this movie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And just while we're talking about actors briefly, I wanted to put in that Archie Punjabi, who plays Pinky, her sister, is actually, like, a very well-known actress at the time. And her dad, Anupam Kher, is a very, very well-known Indian actor. Gurinder specifically cast him to increase the appeal of the movie in India for like the Indian theatrical release.
That's smart.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, she had a big hand in the casting, and I think she did a great job pulling this group of people together.
Before we get too far away from the all the stuff about professional women's sports, one of the things that I was thinking while I was watching this was about Abby Wambach. I don't know if you are familiar with her.
Yeah. I know, like, that dream team.
Yeah.
Brandi Chastain, Mia Hamm, Abby Wambach, like all of those people.
Yeah, and she was like one of the highest scoring people, you know, like in all of soccer, like an amazing player. I was listening to a podcast earlier this year with her on there, and she was just talking about her life after retiring from sports. And the podcast is called On Being, and they were not really talking about sports in that, but I'll link to it in the show notes if people want to check it out. Because she was saying how like she met the president and she was lined up with all of these other elite athletes who were all men, and how everyone around her was like a multimillionaire. And
oh my God.
And she was happy to have like broken six figures recently, you know, so she's making like 200, 300,000 or something like that. And they're, you know, 20, 30 million ahead. And it's just, you know, why? Because she's a woman. I mean, that's the only reason why.
Yeah. The idea of a woman being good at sports doesn't sell. It's not inspirational enough. Mm-hmm. It's not going to get people to buy a product or turn on a TV. And
she was even saying how she was like the soccer coach of like her kids' soccer team, and parents like telling her like, you don't know anything about soccer, you don't know what you're talking about. Are you serious? Oh my fucking
because
they don't know who she is. And one mother was telling her like, well, if you would teach these kids the stuff that Abby Wambach does, then blah 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 blah. And she was like, I can't even with you right now.
Oh my God.
I'm gonna punch you in the face. So she's constantly like having to just deal with people not taking her seriously, even when she's still in the field that she's most famous for. So it's nuts.
And so the sport that I'm playing now, which is ultimate frisbee, it's interesting because women do compete at a high level. Like there's like a women's nationals, and there's also like a really competitive co-ed scene. Like a lot of the people who play at a high level are really aware of gender equity and trying to promote the women's game. But there is a professional, like a semi-professional men's league where like they don't get paid a salary, but you know, all of their like travel and uniforms and stuff are covered, and they play in, you know, like mostly high school football stadiums. It's really disappointing that, you know, there are a lot of big name men players and like team owners who really just like don't get it. I do have a friend who I know who was on a team that won women's nationals.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she's such a badass, although she's having to quit to pursue an actual career where she can make money.
Yeah. See?
Yeah. Another reason why this movie resonates with me still is because, like, yeah, the issue of women in sport is still a really contentious issue, and something that I'm, like, dealing with in my life.
But, like, half the population of the world is women. And you think about how much money is spent on sports and sports memorabilia. And, like, that's a part of this movie where she's got, like, the Beckham jersey and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there's a lot of money to be made by promoting elite athletes of any gender and then cashing in on that whole thing. Like, I don't know. It's just weird.
So moving on, like, from specifically women in sports to just, like, femininity and feminism more broadly, Grinder is on record saying that the idea of, like, bending the ball, like, curling it so it looks like it's going one way but then goes the other direction, is actually, like, a metaphor for, like, all of the obstacles that are set up in front of girls achieving their goals and how they have to kind of, like, bend the rules and twist themselves to get what they want. So I don't know if you saw that. It didn't come across to me.
I wish that no one had said that in the movie. Like, it's good that they don't say that.
Yeah.
But I wish that someone had expressed at some point, like, we have to bend around their rules or something. You know, like that. And then you could kind of put it together like, oh, I get it. The name of the movie.
Yeah. But thinking more about what the movie's actually trying to say about feminism, if it is trying to say anything about feminism, I think it's a really strong representation of the idea of what's sometimes called, like, choice feminism. Feminism gets a bad rap from people thinking that in order to be a good feminist, you, like, can't be a stay-at-home mom or you can't prioritize your family over your career. And that's kind of, like, in contrast to, I think, what is, like, the more true and like, mainstream vision of feminism as choice feminism, where it's, like, the point of feminism isn't to go from saying, like, oh, you have to stay within the home and only act within that sphere, to you have to be outside of the home and, like, pursue a career. No, the whole point of feminism is to give people that choice, that you can do whatever you feel most drawn to. If that is being a stay-at-home mom and taking care of your kids, then great. If that's pursuing a soccer career, then that's great.
Right.
And I think the climax of the movie, where it's the intercutting of Pinky at her wedding scene and Jess playing soccer in the final at the end, like, they're both so happy and kind of, like, fulfilling their ultimate wish. And the movie, I think, is really trying to say that it's not that one of these choices or one of these women is better than the other. They're, like, both being most fulfilled because they're following what feels right for them.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's really well said. I love that. And I think that's, like, the main theme of the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Like, for all of the characters, they need to be more authentically themselves and to kind of get out from under these wider social pressures. Like, even the parents, like, at the end of this movie, one of the reasons why I think this is a really good story is because nobody's the same at the end of it as they were at the beginning. Not even the supporting characters, like the parents.
Yeah.
They've all kind of gone on a emotional arc.
And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about the male gaze and the female gaze and, like, the way that bodies are represented in the movie. I really liked the way that the movie handled it. It shows, I think, the female gaze of Pinky's friends watching, like, Jess's guy friends playing without their shirts on in the park. And I think the kind of, like, it kind of invites the young female viewers to, like, gaze upon them in that way.
He is so tick, man.
Innit, I know.
Oh, look. He's taking a shot.
Oh my God. A body like that should come with an exit certificate warning.
And a lifetime guarantee, man.
Yeah, man. Call Jess. Call Jess.
Oi, Jess!
Jess, man. Who's your friend with the gorgeous bod?
The one with the six-pack.
If he looks at me, I really will faint. What, Taz?
Taz?
Is that his name?
Oh,
my God.
oh, look at that kick.
Oh, so fly.
It's fine. It's so fine.
And then, of course, her guy friends are like doing the same thing to the female players when they're playing soccer.
They don't look like lizards, do they? Lads, check out the boobs on the captain.
Jeez, man, they must get in the way.
She's lucky she ain't knocked herself out running up and down the pitch with them.
Why can't you lot just see them as footballers? What?
And it's kind of like it's showing that gaze going both ways, but they're also like, I don't think the movie is trying to say that they're exactly equivalent either, though, right? Because the female objectification of the male players ultimately has no impact on their life and like what opportunities are available for them.
Right.
Whereas like the male gaze on the female players, you know, the movie is already saying so much about like how their opportunities are limited and how they aren't really seen as just football players. And that's, you know, what her friend Tony says, like, can't you just see them as footballers? And I thought the way that the camera existed in the women's locker room was really interesting too, because I don't know. So like as a woman who spent a lot of time in like women's locker room spaces, the feeling that I got from the way the camera moved around in that space was that it felt really comfortable with women's bodies, but it wasn't objectifying them at all.
Actually, like when they're getting undressed and stuff, it's about her embarrassment and how uncomfortable she is, right?
You mean about her scar?
Well, not just the scar, but like she puts on the jersey over her other clothes and then takes off the shirt that she has on underneath.
You know, I don't think I even noticed that. But then all of the other girls are just like walking around in sports bras.
Mm-hmm.
No,
yeah.
I thought it did a really good balance, right? Because they could have just gone with the choice of like, oh, we're not going to show that intimate space. But that wouldn't have been authentic to the experience of playing sports and being in that space. And I think that in some ways that would like reinforce the message that like female bodies are just for male consumption, right? And I think it felt like a celebration of like women's bodies as athletes. It didn't feel like it was trying to be like titillating or anything.
What do you think about the scene, like given that, where the mother is trying to get her to buy bras that aren't about sports?
You're mad. I want to be seen dead in there.
Oh, the rage poppet. You blew him up, just like a Lila. Look, this little pump comes free with it. Pop it in there, in the valve. Pump, pump, pump away. Up it goes. Then slip it back in there. Boom, boom. Cleavage. And they're perfect while you're still growing, because they lift you right there.
God, you're so embarrassing.
What you've got, sweetheart. All the girls have bought one for their daughters. Well, look, there's the fleur, that's pretty. And the gel bra, that's a clever one. No pumping, it's already in there. Oh, no, sweetheart, not the sports bras. They're so plain. They don't enhance.
What, no one's going to see them?
No, but it's not how they look, it's how they make you feel.
Oh, yeah. Well, so there's this whole thing about femininity in the movie, right? Like both Jess and Jules really like wearing kind of like understated, more masculine clothes, like tracksuits or whatever, like things that mean
comfortable clothes?
Yeah, comfortable clothes. Things that aren't like, things that are meant to, be comfortable and functional and are not meant to be appealing to men.
Because we don't like you all to be comfortable. Right. Like, I've never understood this concept. Like, it makes no sense to me.
Yeah, like, I didn't really give a shit about clothes growing up either. I mostly just wear, like, jeans and t-shirts, not tracksuits. I mean, and my mom didn't push me at all to do otherwise. I think the fact that they were just wearing, like, really ordinary kind of, like, casual clothes helped me identify with the characters more and feeling, kind of like somewhat of an outsider for the way that you're kind of expected to perform femininity. I really liked at one point there was a scene where it cuts to Jess's parents watching like a movie or something where there's like a Bollywood movie and there's like a guy and there's like these two female dancers and all it is just like him looking at their legs and like freaking out. I thought that was really interesting to put in there because it's, I think her parents a lot of times, like their perspective is that, the British culture is pushing, you know, their girls to like act like whores or whatever. And then like, you know, like good, wholesome Indian culture wants them to do something else. But there's actually like, there is like similar levels of objectification within Indian culture. And they like don't see that as problematic in the same way. Which is like kind of an interesting blind spot that I think the movie is pointing out for them.
I think the use of that also is like this brilliantly sneaky way to like celebrate and like also, like you say, problematize Bollywood movies. So I just loved having that in there. I was like, oh, that's so smart to put that in there. Because of course they watch this, but also at the same time, I bet you there's a whole bunch of white kids who watch it and they're like, what is that? And have never seen it before or know what it is at all. I loved that she put that in there. It's so smart.
I also love how during the clubbing scene in Germany, all of the soccer players have really intense sports bra tan lines. And like even Keira Knightley does. And that's just like, that's so authentic. And it's something that you get when you hire like actual soccer players, not like, you know, actresses who are worried about their perfect whatever tan line bodies. And that Keira Knightley was like training so much for this role that she actually got that tan. Parminder actually her skin did get a lot darker from all the time that she was spending outside, and then that they have the mom put that line in there as like a nod both to like the reality of her skin tone, but also the internalized racism and like colorism within the Indian community.
Good old colonialism.
And also, so I don't know if you knew this, but apparently the scar that Jess has, that's actually Parminder's real scar. And and the story in the movie is the real story for how Parminder got the scar.
Oh, no. I didn't know that at all.
I was 8. My mum was working overtime at Heathrow, and I was trying to cook beans on toast. And I jumped up to the grill to get the toast. My trousers caught alight, so my sister put me in the bath, poured cold water over me and pulled them off. But half my skin came off too.
Sorry.
I know. Put me off beans on toast for life.
They were afraid that it would basically prevent her from getting the role. And instead, they just added it into the movie. Part of what makes the movie feel so real, right, is there's like all these little extra details that actually like came from the actors themselves and got incorporated into the story and like make it feel a lot more rich.
So wait, like, is his injury real then? Or did they add
that
element?
That scar, I think, was probably
makeup?
fake. Yeah.
That's interesting. So I wonder if they wrote that to like, because they kind of bond there. Like, that's an important emotional touchstone for those characters.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this later, but like the romance is definitely, I think, like the C plot of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I didn't even include it in the summary because I was just like, well, it's not that important.
I didn't even think of it as being a part of the romance. I mean, you're right about that. The scar, you can almost read it as like a metaphor for like personal shame. Now that she's finally getting to start to live her dreams, she's got like this imposter syndrome kicking in, right? Like, who am I? I've only been playing in the park. Jesus, what have I gotten myself into? I'm over my head. And this, you know, the coach comes over and says, hey, look, I've got a scar too. Like, everybody's carrying around these issues. Like, it's not a big deal. Just get out there and do your best. Nobody cares. It's just a stepping stone to her accepting herself, right? That's more what that scar is about.
Well, and I think the scar also speaks to like, I think a very specific type of body shame that a lot of women feel. You know, there's a lot of pressure to be perfect. I think a lot of people do have a lot of like shame about scars. And it's like, if you have a scar, it's because like something happened to your skin. Like, it's not, there's no like morality or like, there shouldn't be any morality or shame attached to that. It's just a mark on your body. but there really is, especially for women.
Yeah, and that's why that scene plays so well. I'm just shocked to hear that that it wasn't a part of the script and that it was like incorporated because of her actual scar, because to me it just feels so fundamental to the story. So that's fascinating to find that out.
Okay, so now I think we should really dig into the LGBT stuff, or I guess LG at least.
Oh yeah, we got a lot of feedback about that. And Jenna and Sarah, other girl, and Kate, I Do Human Things, they all said that I ship the two girls. I wish it was gayer, basically. Like,
yeah. And so that's interesting because I actually had no idea about this. And I consider myself like not super well versed, but reasonably well versed in like queer pop culture from this era. But so there's a quote from Heather Hogan in an ESPN article that we'll link in the show notes, where she says, there really isn't another movie in the entirety of the queer subtext canon that is considered as universally queer as Bend It Like Beckham. It's honestly the plot of Pride and Prejudice inside a soccer movie. Both women being in love with Coach Joe feels like it's wedged in there to convince the audience those two women aren't in love with each other.
Heather Hogan is completely entitled to her opinion and reading of this, and so I'm not exactly contradicting it, but I'm confused at how this is a Pride and Prejudice. Like, who's the Wickham? Like, what?
Maybe she meant that as like a more loose metaphor for like push-pull romance rather than like,
I guess, yeah,
specific.
I was just confused by that when I read it. I was like, what? Wait. I get it. Keira Knightley, she was in Pride and Prejudice. It's fine, but whatever.
And on the one hand, I do agree that the romance feels wedged in there, or I would say it just like, it doesn't feel like a central important part of the movie. And I actually like that about it. Like, I'm glad that it's not central to the movie.
I'm glad it's there though, because it is a coming of age story, and it's just one element of her becoming fully grown and independent, is like her sexuality and like the choice of like, who am I going to be with? And this is one option, and like navigating the complexity of friendship and romance. Like, that's good that it's in there. I'm glad that it's not the point though.
Yeah. Like, on the one hand, I think it's shitty that this could have been like a really important representation of women in a romantic relationship together. I'm also not that upset that it's a portrayal of like not super feminine straight women playing sports, because I think there's also like a big stereotype that to be a good female athlete, you have to be a lesbian. And so I feel like it's almost one of those situations where it's like there's so little representation of women in sports that you can end up getting like factions fighting against each other for representation. It's like, oh, well, like straight girls can play sports too, but like lesbians aren't ever shown in movies at all, ever. So like, why can't we have the sports movie? There should really just be like a lot more movies about women in sports, some with straight characters, some with lesbian characters. And so we're not just like fighting over who gets to be represented in like the one good female sports movie.
Which would probably also help with normalizing that and helping to build up the sports community around women's sports at the same time. So
yeah,
that would just all around be good.
Watching through the movie this time, I was keeping an eye on the romance between them, and I can definitely see how, like, if you're watching it with that perspective, it's so gay. It's just so beautifully gay. And I love that people choose to read it that way, and that it became iconic that way, you know? But yeah, apparently Keira Knightley was interviewed recently by Pride Source and said that she does think that there should be like a lesbian sequel, or it should be remade as a lesbian love story. And she agrees that Jules and Jess should have ended up together. So Kiera's on your side, everybody. Like, don't worry.
It'd be fun to like have a sequel where they are like soccer moms, but together, and like their kids are playing soccer and they're teaching them like, no, like you got to bend it like Beckham. And they're like, who?
Yeah.
Who is that?
We talked a little bit earlier about how Jules's mom, Paula, like her homophobia does not age well. Like, you can tell it was meant in kind of a lighthearted way, where she's like, oh, you know, devastated when she thinks her daughter is a lesbian, but trying to really be okay with it because she knows that that's like the politically correct thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel like Jess's friend Tony, who ends up coming out as gay as part of the movie, I almost feel like he was added in to make the movie seem less anti-LG. I mean, on the one hand, Paula's homophobia is like devastatingly real. And so you do need a counterbalance to show that, like, the movie's not actually saying that this is okay. Like, the movie is firmly of the stance that being gay is okay. It doesn't feel exactly just tacked on, because I feel like his gayness does end up influencing the plot in some ways. When he tries to tell their parents that they're going to get married as a way to cover for her so she can go to America and play soccer.
Mm-hmm.
In that way, I feel like his character is a bit more fleshed out and feels more authentic than it could be.
That moment is informed by his sexuality, where you understand that this is a larger sacrifice for him.
Yeah.
Although it's like a terrible choice that I'm glad they back out of immediately.
Yeah.
I think the way to do that, to make sure that your movie is sending a message that is not anti-gay, is to arc Paula out of that homophobia, probably by way of love for her daughter, instead of like a Maria Navratilova joke. Like, having the gay character in there of Tony is good, because there should be more representation just all around. Like, I think you're right in what you're saying, that he's there to kind of balance the perspective of the movie and make it very clear where the movie's ethics are grounded. But like, I wouldn't take him out because of that. For Jules to say, like, you know, Mom, you're wrong about this. Like, there should be probably even more gay characters, I would say, just all around in the movie.
It is kind of an accurate snapshot for where the like British Indian community was on those issues in the late 90s. Jess's whole response of like, oh, but you're Indian. Like, there's a perception that like, oh yeah, there's these like alternative sexual orientations, but they are not in our community. They're from outside the community. And that a lot of the like aunties like don't even know the word lesbian or like understand what
They're
that is.
Completely confused by that, which felt so real. I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah. And that Grinders was saying that like that came from genuine things that she's observed from people in her family and her community. Oh, and while we're talking about this movie as like queer culture, I just want to point out that like Sporty Spice is a huge queer icon, and also has probably like the second biggest celebrity role in the movie. So 2 of her songs are actually featured in the film, and
they name drop her.
And Paula has that line about how,
Honey, all I'm saying is there is a reason why Sporty Spice is the only one of them without a fella.
And so they invited Mel C, aka Sporty Spice, to watch the movie before it was released, and apparently she like loved that line and was laughing out loud.
That's great.
Yeah, and as far as like things that resonated with me as a kid, I definitely like Sporty Spice was hands down my favorite, and like the Spice Girl that I wanted to be. So like I so identified with that. So how did you feel about the romance and the way it was pulled off? This is 2019. We're in like the Me Too or post Me Too era, right? And I think there's been a lot of conversations in the past few years about like power differentials between different people and like to what extent, in what situations people can really consent. I think the movie does a decent job of sort of portraying Joe as like very young, but there's still that power differential between him as the coach and her as the player. And there's that scene where like he's yelling at her, and I think she takes it really personally because they've had that sort of like quasi-romantic interactions, and she's attached to him not just as a coach.
I do think that it's good that it kind of starts in her mind. I don't know how to say it the right way, but since the movie is in her perspective and is about her, it feels like not exactly wish fulfillment, but like I'm choosing this person and then I want to go after it. And, oh, actually, this is a little bit too much for me right now. I'm not going to go ahead with this. Mm-hmm. And so I like all of those aspects about how much agency she has in her romantic choices and the pace at which those things move. And it makes sense that her being young and this being a coming of age story, she would make a kind of inappropriate choice. But the actual dynamics of that relationship, made me pretty uncomfortable, especially like now that I'm grown up and relating more to the parents than I am to the kids.
Yeah.
I was like, you are making the wrong move here, dude. Like, it does not matter how, talented and beautiful and smart this girl is. She is like your player. This is not the right move.
I think it could have been a lot worse. Like, in general, he's pretty respectful. And then the other thing is that, like, when I was playing rugby in college, at several points, we had, like, players dating our coaches who were, again, like, a couple years older. But I guess, when you have a high schooler dating someone who's a few years out of high school, that's different than you have a college student who's dating someone who's a few years out of college. Like that same age differential means more the younger the student is. I think the people I knew found a way to make it work. Looking back, I don't think I would have say like, oh, they shouldn't have dated our team coach. But again, like rugby is it's like a club sport at most schools, it wasn't a varsity sport. The coach wasn't like really getting paid that much. It wasn't a career track. It wasn't like the coach had a lot of power to determine, like the course of their life. Whereas clearly she had a lot on the line, right? And he could have used that to manipulate her. Like he didn't. It didn't happen that way in this movie. Like the relationship seems pretty functional. But it's like kind of playing with fire.
And he's not like grooming a bunch of women for him to choose from.
Yeah.
Like you get no sense that is the case. It's just that these two people happen to have an attraction and a spark.
And a connection.
Yeah.
That I think the movie does a decent job of building, despite the fact that, like I said, it is basically like the C or D plot of the movie.
Speaking of like 2019 versions of this or something like that, like I don't think that would be a part of the story anymore, especially given like all of the scandals around sport coaches and sexual abuse that have come out, not just between a man and a woman necessarily. Like there's a lot of abuse of men on men and stuff that has come out over the years. So yeah, I don't think this element of the plot would survive an adaptation or would be like so severely changed as to be something different. Also, like it just felt like, given like the rise of YA fiction and female protagonists, I was like, where is like the two boys that she's supposed to choose from? That's like the normal trope. Why is it the coach? It doesn't make sense.
Oh, I'm so glad that there was none of that in this movie.
Me too. No. But I was just like,
but I think you're right. If this movie were to be remade, it would have to be a romance between the two main characters.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I wanted to mention was just the role of food in this movie. I think for a lot of diaspora peoples, like food is one of the central things that connects them back to their culture. Food comes up over and over again in this movie. She's like learning how to make this Indian meal throughout the movie. And, there's like chapatis and aloo gobi. And then the seamstress tailor woman like comparing her breasts to like mangoes in the tailoring scene. I thought that was a really nice representation of the really strong role that food does serve as part of cultural identity. I want to just like point out that there's a a funny segment by the comedian Hari Kondabolu that's all about Indian people and their relationship to mangoes that I think kind of speaks to that like special relationship that you can have with food when you're living in a culture that is like not your culture or not your family's culture. Yeah, so we'll link to that in the show notes.
I loved all of that stuff. And probably the biggest laugh that me and Christina had while we were watching the movie was her mother, like at the end. And she was like, I taught her how to make Indian dinner, like vegetarian dinner, and that is all I can do. And God has to do the rest.
Yeah, like vegetarian and meat, full dinner.
Right. So good.
I also really loved the role that music played in the movie. I watched this movie so much in high school. There's not a song on the soundtrack that does not just like immediately bring me back to that feeling of what it was like to be like a 16, 17-year-old watching this movie.
Do you have a favorite track?
I mean, I really love Curtis Mayfield, and this movie like got me into Curtis Mayfield more generally. So I would say like that's probably the one that I like the most and the one that I've listened to the most like outside of this movie. But they all work so well together. And I love how there's like, for the most part, kind of like Western music for the soccer teams and then Indian music used for the home scenes. And then in sort of like the wedding soccer montage where it's cutting back and forth, it starts out with the Indian dance song and then switches to like the Western opera music. And so it's kind of like and then the at the end they play the Bina Mystery version of Hot Hot Hot, where so like the original
it's so good.
The original song was done by a Caribbean artist. It's all in English. And then, you know, there's the Bina Mystery version that has a lot of Hindi in it. And so I get.
Wait, so is it originally a Hindi song?
No, it's originally just an English song.
Okay.
But she added a bunch of Hindi lyrics. It's like the original song is a bit more sparse, just kind of like a jammy thing with like the chorus kind of over and over again. And Being a Mystery added like a bunch of lyrics in between.
I love that.
Yeah, so
that whole thing is so fun.
So like the way that the music is used to kind of like differentiate the different areas of her life and then kind of like fuse them together and like really highlight the British Indian music industry. Like a lot of the music here came from Gurinder's CD collection. And so yeah, I just thought the music is almost its own character in this movie. So I just had a couple other things that I wanted to touch on. I love it's like not quite a traditional 3-beat, but kind of a different kind of 3-beat of the wedding decoration lights. When Pinky gets engaged, you see her dad putting the lights up, and then when the wedding's called off, you see him taking the lights down. And then when the wedding's back on, they like put them back up. It's like there's something that's just like really inherently funny about that as like the like physical manifestation of the mood in the house and like how things are going for the family. I love all of the plane shots that are sprinkled in throughout. You know, Hounslow is a suburb that's like right near Heathrow, and so like her family all works at Heathrow, and there's just like constant planes coming by. It's a very authentic, real feeling of that area. Gurinder points out in the commentary that, you know, this is a movie about immigrants, you know, the idea that they like got there by plane and that there's all of these planes around. And then I also really love the idea that the planes are kind of like foreshadowing for the end of the movie, right? Because at the end, they're like in Heathrow, that has been sort of like a constant background of the movie and going off to their like happy ending.
I loved that too. Like I really noticed that. I was like, oh, this is so smart. Like the way that it was just sprinkled in there the whole time, but also how that like speaks to like their kind of economic class and how like the mom has anxiety about that. Like nobody has airplanes fly over their house who has money. They're working class.
Yeah.
it's showing that, but simultaneously, like, it was sprinkling that in the whole time to lead up to that ending. And you're like, oh, wow. Yeah, that just knits the whole thing together so well. Given the age of all these characters and the fact that they are Sikh, I was thinking like, oh, I wonder if her parents moved to England to get away from the political unrest that happened in the 80s in northern Pakistan around the Sikh community.
Oh.
Because they had like a revolution where the Sikhs tried to become like their own country, tried to like secede kind of.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was just like a big mess. And there's also like pressure from Islamists to the north and the Indian government and all this stuff. They kind of got cracked like a nut, like it didn't go off. But a lot of Sikhs got out of the country around that time. It was actually like less dangerous to live in England, you know, and they didn't have as much money as some of the other people in their communities. So it seemed like they weren't the children of immigrants. They were the immigrants. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That feels very authentic. And they have the icon of the prophet on the wall and all this stuff. And so like from a religious and historical thing, I was like, all of this, like I didn't know all this stuff that you're talking about with the director and all the autobiography, but I was like, this is all extremely authentic. Like whoever made this absolutely knows what they're talking about.
Well, I don't
from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah, I don't know exactly like what the backstory is on the parents, but I do know. So Gurinder was born in Kenya, just like the father, and they her parents moved to London when she was a young kid. That is something that was really autobiographical, and I think her father experienced a lot of discrimination for being Sikh in London when they first moved there.
Yeah, and Sikhism is like extremely distinctive because of the head wrap and the long hair that it covers and all of that stuff. So they're like visually they're easy to pick out, right? Because versus like another, like if you're Buddhist or something, nobody can tell by looking at you, as opposed to like Orthodox Jew or something like that. And so that's something that Sikhs deal with all the time. But it was just so interesting to like see a movie that just kind of normalized that Sikh experience, which you don't see that much.
Yeah.
Like Sikhs are so interesting to me, like they're like this combination of like, they're kind of like a reaction that happened in like the 1500s to Islam and to Buddhism and Hinduism. The picture that they have, the icon, that's the founder of the religion that the mom is like praying to all the time. And he like basically like took kind of the best elements of those three traditions and kind of combined them into this, like, it's a monotheistic religion that is all about like your behavior and like social justice and education. And so it was just really cool to see it in a movie represented in a way that shows that they're just like regular people, but also like these are all the values and anxieties that they have, which are just as normal as the anxieties that the white people have about their kids in the story as well.
Yeah.
And so like that contrast is so smart and lovely, and it was just a real cool thing about the movie. So you said that you saw this movie like so many times with your friend growing up. Have you shared it with other people, like when you went on to college and as an adult? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, I've made sure to rewatch it like every few years. You know, it's one of the movies that I think I like quote most, just like in life. Certain phrases will like come to me in different situations, and so like every once in a while I'll realize that like I have a good friend who hasn't seen the movie, and I'm like, okay, like let's pick a date, like I'm gonna make aloo gobi and then we'll watch this movie.
We're gonna start a podcast and I'm gonna make you watch this movie.
Yeah, and everyone I've shown it to I think has like really enjoyed the experience of watching it. So I've had a lot of success showing it to other people. I went to the UK for the first time a couple years ago and like flew into Heathrow, and I remember I was like taking the bus into the city center and we were like going through Hounslow, and I was like so excited for this like very like ordinary quiet suburb. But I was like, oh my god, I'm where it all happened.
Does it look like that? Did they shoot on location?
Yeah, it's very accurate. Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
like that first shopping scene where they're going to get stuff for Pinky's wedding, like that Broadway street is the street where Gurinder grew up and like did all of her shopping with her parents as a kid. So the house set, it was like a set in a movie studio, but a lot of the furnishings she just took from her mom's house.
We were joking, me and Christina, when we were watching it about the couch and stuff. We were like, oh man, that is like some embarrassing furniture on a certain level. So that's kind of perfect.
Yeah. Like one of the comments that she got a lot as the movie was screening was a lot of like British South Asian teenagers were like, you gave away all of our tricks. They're like hiding in the bed and like sneaking out the door, hiding the things in the garden, like all of that. She was like, yeah, there's a reason why I put all that in there, because that was like the shit I was doing when I was a teenager. My Taiwanese friend, at one point, she was like dating the white boy next door secretly, and her parents didn't know. And she would like invite me and my friend, our other friend, over and then like leave us in her bedroom to go like make out with her boyfriend.
Oh, wow.
Because like if we weren't there, her parents would want to keep an eye on her. But, you know, when we were there, they just assumed that we were all hanging out in her room. And it was just like,
that's so funny.
Yeah. So do you have any other final thoughts on the movie now that we've discussed it?
No, it was so cool though to find out all that stuff about the director. Like I had no idea, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to trying to share it with my kids. I've got 2 young daughters. I think they'd really like this movie, but they were not for watching any movies with me lately. Like every time I try to like, hey, let's watch a movie, they're like, hey, let's not. So like,
so you gotta wait.
Just not in a place.
You gotta wait for the right moment to introduce it to them, I guess. Yeah, I love this movie, and I think that it continues to resonate with audiences, both like people who've loved it for a long time and people who are discovering it for the first time. To prepare for this episode, I just kind of did a general like search for the phrase "Bend It Like Beckham" on Twitter, and there's like a ton of really recent threads like of people talking about this movie and how much it meant to them. And there was even this like really great thread about all of the lesbian moments, the buildup of that subtextual romance between Jess and Jules that I thought was really funny and beautiful. Yeah, and I thought it was really great. So we can put that in the show notes too. So join us next month for an episode on A Knight's Tale, which is basically, I think, Alan's answer to this movie for me in terms of like his favorite kind of teen exploitation romance thing.
I wouldn't even say it's a teen movie. I mean, it is definitely a coming of age movie now that I'm thinking about it. So maybe you got a good
Maybe
point
I
there.
just think it's a teen movie because it came out when I was a teen and like my peers liked it. Although I have not seen this movie, so I'm actually really looking forward to watching it.
I love the movie because it has, and this might mess with your strangely literalness, but it has this audio-visual quality to it that distorts the reality of the film, but it gives you, the modern viewer, the context and feeling of what is happening in the medieval setting. We'll talk about it when we cover it, but there's like the use of music in the movie and the use of like visuals and the motion of the camera and stuff are really, really smart. And it like kind of swings in and out of modernity and like antiquity in a way that I think is brilliant and fascinating.
Awesome. Well, I cannot wait to watch that. So the other thing that I really wanted to say that I forgot was just that if you like this movie and you like its like pro-women in sports message, the 2019 Women's World Cup is coming up. It's going to be from June 7th to July 7th. So starting a week after this episode drops. And that's one of the reasons why we specifically rearranged the schedule so that this episode would be happening right now. So definitely check that out. Even though FIFA has a lot of problematic issues, I'm still really, really looking forward to this World Cup and enjoying the chance to see some amazing women athletes compete on the international stage. And so with that, I'm Anya, and you can follow me on Twitter at StrangelyLiteral. That's strangely, then Literl.
I'm Alan, and you can follow the show on Twitter at HGStorycast and visit our website at hgstorycast.com.
And if you'd like to leave us feedback, you can visit hgstorycast.com/contact or send an email to contact@hallowedgroundmedia.com. Hallowed Ground Storycast is a Hallowed Ground Media production and is produced under a Creative Commons non-commercial share-alike license.